Welcome to the Fantasy Footballers Dynasty Podcast with Borg, Betz, and a baller.
Welcome in. Wednesday, July 26th, the 17th episode of the Fantasy Footballers Dynasty Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Borganoni, and I am joined by Matthew Betz and Jason Moore here.
That's Jason Sweaty Bottom Moore to you right now.
No questions asked. We're just going to roll with that.
just pause after that. Just let it linger. Say, what did he just say?
Yep, he said what I think he said.
Yes, I did.
Jason is a kind man, a generous man, I would call, but the things that the chair that he sits in has experienced so far, I feel terrible. Like, I just feel terrible that when you came in today, that chair was going, no, please, no, not today.
Yeah. So we were having a pickleball sesh, and I was going to come in, shower quick, get to recording this show, and, well, we ran a little long, and so I came right in, and I sat down on this chair, and I will be throwing this chair away immediately after the recording for the sake of the chair.
We have a good stash of chairs, so I think Jason's fine. But where does Sweaty Bottom rank in terms of? I know that this is the year of the nickname for you, the entire nickname shirt that, of course, we will be coming out with. But where does Sweaty Bottom rank in terms of the tiers of your nicknames, Jason?
Well, because it's so fresh and new and disgusting, I'd put it pretty low. But for this show, it makes sense because on this show, we get a little nasty.
Well done. Well,
that was
great.
What a pro reference. That was just beautiful.
Jason,
yeah. It's like I do this for a living.
Yeah, I know. And usually, Andy gets to handle the board, Mike gets to, but you have your own space to do whatever you want. You hit that nasty drop as much as you want. And I hope, Jason, that as we get later on, we get closer to the season, we have our Nasty Boys of the Summer segment coming up later this next month. You just hit that thing a million times, brother.
Oh, it's going to be a nasty show.
Yeah, we're going to get nasty. Last week we talked about top 10 running backs in Dynasty. This week we're going to go a little bit further and talk about some of the players that I think are really hard to gauge. I even got to look on our Discord and asked everybody, hey, who are the Dynasty running backs that you want to hear about? So we'll get to talk about some of those today. We'll get to go all over the place. Betz, I want to know how you are doing. You get a lot of nicknames from me on our DFS and betting podcast, but how are you in this late July?
I do, and the best part about that is I never know what's coming when Kyle just brings out a random joke or reference that usually doesn't make sense, but I just roll with it for the nickname. But I'm good, man. Yeah, it's finally here. Football is here. Training camps are open for, I think, every team by the time this podcast is out, which is exciting. Injuries are already rolling in, so I'm busy with that sort of stuff and the UDK updating all that. But, man, it is – I feel like when we get to, like, late June, early July, it's like we kind of hit that reprieve of, all right, football is coming, but, like, we need to just take a second here and, like, breathe. And then all of a sudden, football is here and it's in our face, and I am excited because we have training camp. We have preseason football happening in, like, 2 or 3 weeks. So let's go, boys.
I feel like the last couple of days, this weekend especially, we got a smattering of bad news. Like, usually we get the puff pieces where, we're supposed to say, like, oh, this player's, going to the moon. We see their ADPs rise. I feel like we only got bad news when training camp opened for either player injuries, players aren't on track, they're not signing their tender. Kadarius Toney apparently doesn't want to play football, or at least his body won't allow him. So, yeah, I want something to, like, really get me going. I just need one Keenan Allen highlight. Is there any player, before we get in the main segment, is there any player that you are just like, I just need one highlight of this person just to really get me in the mood?
I mean, my favorite players are Amon-Ra St. Brown. I'm with you on Keenan, but you're a bigger Keenan Allen guy than I am. I love Terry McLaurin, but I feel like there will be no shortage of Amon-Ra St. Brown highlights considering the state of the Lions wide receiver depth chart. So I'm very excited for my timeline to just be littered with Amon-Ra St. Brown highlights this August.
Yeah, for me, I'm looking forward to seeing Breece Hall do something special, look healthy, maybe mix in a little Javonte there, just for, like, oh, look at that. I don't want no straight line stuff. I want to see them cutting. But the one that's going to be the most fun the most fun video that will come out of training camp, it's going to be Allen Robinson, baby. Allen Robinson catching a fade, touchdown, mossing a dude, and the coach is saying he looks like his best. He's the healthiest he's been in his whole career. Can't wait.
Yeah, this is about us admiring what other people younger than us can do while wearing shorts and running around and eventually wearing pads and eventually putting on like real helmets and playing in real games. We're kind of admiring this progression, but Allen Robinson, dude shows out. Dude's made some money too. Like Allen Robinson from very beginning of this podcast, y'all's podcast, 2015, he was one of Mike's My Guys way back then. He may have been another My Guy for someone else. I won't mention when, but he's gone the gamut of awesome. He was the target monster and now still collecting a paycheck. Here's my question in Dynasty. Will he be in the league next year?
No. The National Football League? I do not believe so.
Betz?
It's truly 50-50 coin flip. Like, could he get a veteran minimum somewhere? Probably. Will someone offer it to him? I have no idea.
Yeah, that's a fun guessing game to look at your Dynasty roster, to look at your bench, and just simply say, who's going to actually be in the league next year? Who's going to have a contract? Who's waiting for somebody to pick them up? If you'd like to get all of our rankings, you can get them in the Ultimate Draft Kit Plus, our startup rankings. Today, we're going to go through running back ones. So if you want Jason's specific running back rankings, and you do, you can get that in the Ultimate Draft Kit Plus, our Dynasty Pass, which is updated daily. I just went through and was updating some things about certain teams, their team opportunities, and I'm starting to at least look at the rest of the Raiders backfield and ask myself the question, like in our Dynasty Pass, like who's going to get the opportunities if Josh Jacobs is out week 1 or even beyond this year if he doesn't want to be with the team. So you can get all of that in the Ultimate Draft Kit, ultimatedraftkit.com. But let's talk about running backs.
Dynasty Rankings.
Last week, we went through the top 10 Dynasty running back rankings in the Ultimate Draft Kit Plus. So we were giving that away just for people to know. But I want to go through that list real quick. Jason, you weren't on that show. Mike got to just, rule the day. So from this list, anybody quickly that stands out to you? Bijan Robinson 1, Breece Hall, Jonathan Taylor, Christian McCaffrey, Jahmyr Gibbs, Saquon Barkley, Travis Etienne, Josh Jacobs, Kenneth Walker, and your boy Ramondre Stevenson. Any of those names that feel out of place or scary for you, Jason, in the top 10?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of them that you have certain worries over. Saquon has been someone for Dynasty leagues that this offseason I've been trying to shop and recommend like cashing in on. Now I worry because of the whole, training camp holdout. I've seen like on Underdog, he's gone from a first-round pick to – I've seen him drop to the third round. Like now everyone is afraid that the holdout is going to be real, so I don't think you're going to really capitalize on him. But, there's a world with Saquon and Jacobs where they play out their franchise tag. Then they're a little bit older. They don't get a good free agent market because that doesn't exist anymore. And next thing you know, you've got these young superstars who are still absolutely good enough to get it done. And they don't have the NFL investing in them in a way that will give them the fantasy relevance that they deserve to have for the future. So those two guys are a little bit scary. You got Etienne and Walker that, I don't know how much you guys got into the rookies of Tank Bigsby, and Charbonnet, but those are a little scary. There's really not that many guys that you're just like super confident in.
It's wild. We gave out the statistic last week, but on average, 4.2 running backs will drop from the top 10 every single year. Like just that's what happens, and it's very different than wide receivers where they get to hold their value. We talk about age, so and if somebody drops from 8 to 12, it's not a big deal. But we often see running backs drop from 7 to 10 range to outside the top 20, and you're left holding the bag. We talked about that with Dalvin Cook last week. So, Betz, I know that in one of your leagues, you were trying to make some moves for an age running back who we'll talk about today, Nick Chubb, this past week. But any luck on just trading for older running backs? I mean, I feel like the caution we give people is you want to be a year early on these things, but it's another thing when you're a contender. So any last thoughts on this list, and did you end up trading for Chubb?
I did end up trading for Chubb. It was included as part of a Tyreek Hill deal on a contender. Just I went all in and I'm going for it. But the state of the running back position makes it so weird to trade in Dynasty. Like, there's very few guys that I'm like, oh, I definitely want this guy this year and the next 2-3 years. And it's like the obvious ones of like Bijan, Jahmyr Gibbs, Jonathan Taylor of the world, Breece Halls. But like, no one's trading those guys, right? So like, you can't really, I feel like, get fair value. And now we have other options that you're like, okay, I'm still pretty excited about the outlook for Saquon Barkley. I'm still pretty excited about Josh Jacobs, still only 25 years old. But like, now you add this stuff in with the contract issues and the holdout, and it's like, who am I actually trading for to help me in Dynasty? And it's very tricky. So I feel like I zoomed in on Nick Chubb. I was like, listen, he's got his deal. He's in camp. Everything, and granted, it's the offseason, everything has been glowing about an increased workload. I like betting on the Browns offense this year after a down year last year. So he was a guy I felt like was a good target for a contender. But in general, you can poke holes in almost every running back in Dynasty right now. And so it makes it very tricky to trade for them. Whereas in other leagues that people have offered me, whether it's draft picks, younger wide receivers, I've been very willing to move on this offseason.
We had a question on our Discord, and we can kind of, add this in as we go throughout some of our categories. But someone asked, question for the big old shimmy, who are your favorite running backs outside the top 10 to target? Nick Chubb was one of mine, because I feel like we get like a little bit of a window, and we'll talk about him in a second. But keep those in mind as we talk about these players, guys, like, because trading for running backs, it's really hard to trick somebody in a league. Like, it's very obvious who the running backs are that are young and awesome. We talked about them last week. And so you can't really get a value. You're having to almost pay up for some of the guys that can help you win now. And then a year or two from now, they might not be that helpful. So
yeah, it's one of those, the question specifically is about trading for them on a contender. If you've got a contending team, who are you going after? And you can either go for one of two avenues in Dynasty. If you're a contender in a Dynasty league, you can either go after the gambles that don't hold value because we're not sure. That would be Cam Akers, right? Cam Akers could be awesome this year. He'd suck for a bad Rams team, and that's why he's not going to cost you an arm and a leg to get. But he's someone you could go after, someone like that, or like David Montgomery, where will he get the touchdowns? The other avenue you can go, other than the gamble, is you go aged veterans, and you pay for a guy that is expiring, and you say, I will ride it into the sunset. I'm going to go get Derrick Henry. I'm going to go trade a first-round pick and a middling wide receiver, because I could tell you, Derrick Henry managers, they want to get something. If they're not absolutely contending, if they're not in it to win it, they see him as an expiring asset. They know they're not stupid, and so if they can get any kind of youth for Derrick Henry, if they're not competing for a championship, and maybe that's a mid-season move. Maybe mid-season you realize that team is out of the running, they're not even going to make the playoffs, and you go say, hey, here's a first-round pick in the future for Derrick Henry, and you just go win the championship.
Yeah, for Jeremy and I, we co-manage a Dynasty team. We have Aaron Jones. We know that this is the very end. And for us, trading him away is, I think he's going to have more value as the season progresses. If somebody has an injury, if someone wants to win now. So there's so many different avenues of which side you're on, the context of not just saying, oh, he's a trade away candidate. Well, of course, Aaron Jones is getting too old, or Derrick Henry's getting too old. But for other teams who want to go all in for a championship, it could be much different. So I've mentioned our startup rankings a lot because we're not going to mention every single running back that you want us to mention on the show. We have an awesome article on the site from one of our new writers, Joe Beldner, that's Dynasty Ultimatums, 5 running backs that are entering make or break seasons. You can check out all of our stuff on the site. You can go on our Discord channel. There's always conversations going about Dynasty. But the first category I wanted to gauge y'all's interest on is, who are your favorite running backs right now outside of the top 10 that you think are going to either gain or hold value? So when we have this conversation next year in 2024, who are those running backs? And Betz, I will let you start first.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. The list feels very short of running backs that will hold or gain value. And looking at these guys kind of going outside of the top 10, going from like RB12 to RB24 in our rankings, I was like, man, there's not a lot here that I actually feel very confident will actually hold value, which just speaks to the state of the running back position in Dynasty. The name that I went with that I think will gain some value next year is Kendra Miller, the rookie for New Orleans. Remember, he was the 71st overall pick. He was a day 2 selection for this team. And I feel like I kind of want to just follow the trends of kind of what's happened over the last year plus with Alvin Kamara, and then correlate it with what has the team done, right? So last year there was points in time where Kamara was running routes behind David Johnson, Mark Ingram, and his role combined with his efficiency numbers fell off a decent amount. I wouldn't say it fell off a cliff, but he is approaching the age where it does tend to happen. So there is some concern about that happening, if not this year, then certainly the year after, and plus the potential suspension. So that all happens. Then they sign Jamal Williams. He's coming off an outlier career season, not just the touchdowns, but actually workload. And at his age, I'd like to bet against that and bet on a rookie running back who the team invested pretty decent draft capital in at just 21 years old. We unfortunately didn't get the full picture of his preseason, or I should say pre-NFL draft outlook, given the injury coming off the MCL surgery. But he's a guy that I could see, okay, he doesn't do much for anyone in fantasy for the first 6, 7, 8 weeks, but then all of a sudden kind of starts to carve out a roll down the stretch. And we're remembering, like, yeah, that's the guy we saw at TCU. He's very, very good. So I think there's a chance Kendra Miller can gain some value. I do think he needs to get on the field this year for that to happen, so it is a little bit of a wild card. But like I said, there's not a lot of running backs in Dynasty I actually feel pretty good about that outside of the top 10 guys that we talked about last week. So I'm big on Kendra Miller. I hope he works out. Hope he can get on the field this year for the Saints.
Do you think that right now might be the best time to put in an offer for him? Let's say he's not on your team because, you know, he was kind of a fringe first-round rookie pick, depending on one quarterback super flex. And I feel like there's been a dip with the Kamara news and with him, you know, on that NFI list. Like, I feel like this would be a time where you're going to get him way cheaper than him gaining value over the back end. So is that kind of like, I'd rather strike right now?
I think that's possible. I also think you could wait and see what happens with the Kamara news and or early season outlook. Like, I mean, we've done a ton of research on this, and I've put out, you know, these guys that miss time in camp generally are bad bets in fantasy. Now, there's certain spots where we can pick and choose who we want to target and avoid, but like Kendra Miller's not going to come out and be a difference maker, I don't think, in weeks 1, 2, 3, 4, even if Alvin Kamara is out. And so I think there's an opportunity to be like, this guy's been out of sight, out of mind for part of training camp, then early in the season. So I think his price might even come down if that happens. And so I think that's totally a fine strategy, but you might get a better price on him in a trade if you wait a little bit into the season.
I'm going to hop in real quick and just say that I love this pick. I think Kendre Miller is absolute. Like, it's an almost guarantee that his value rises from wherever it is now. He's a rookie. He's currently third on the depth chart, and it's only going to get better for him in the future. So I love that. I do think that if you're talking in the next several months, as in like into the beginning of the season or right now, you're going to get a better value on him now, because a suspension will most likely come down for Alvin Kamara before the season. And even if Kendre Miller is still like not active, as soon as that happens, as soon as it comes out and the pub is, well, Kamara is missing the first 4 games of the season, Kendre Miller's value will go up a little bit. And so I think you'll have to wait until mid-season and some failure to be able to trade for him, and it's hard to trade for people who are failing. So I would personally try to go kick the tires now and just see if you can include him in a package deal, because he will get better. And my favorite thing about you picking this player, and it's the same reason that I picked the player I picked, is because he's good. Like, Kendre Miller's really good at football. He's a great running back. I loved his film. I'm very confident he will succeed in the NFL. Whether or not he'll be great for fantasy, I don't know, but I really enjoy betting on players that are good at football.
Yeah, I bet you could throw out right now, if you wanted to, a 2024 second. And I think I would rather have Kendre Miller than that, just because of where injuries are and the uncertainty. So I think you could get it done there if the owner's just like, the manager's like, I don't really want him. But Jason, give us your pick.
My pick is another super talented player who is young at the running back position, is Javonte Williams. Javonte, I think, is at a low point right now simply because of the injury. You know, it's one of those things where when you're trading for someone and you want to be sure their value is going to go up, then they have a problem right now. You're third on the depth chart as a rookie in Kendre Miller. You're injured and you're not sure if you're going to start healthy or not, although I saw he's not starting on the pup. That seems weird. I just don't understand what's going on with Javonte, but we know he's super good. We know Sean Payton's systems highlight running backs, get so much value out of the position. He's only 23 years old. So going forward, he's under contract this year. He's under contract next year. He will get healthy, and he's so talented that, you know, he was a guy before the injury. You forget he was creeping up into like top 3 territory. Like, you couldn't get Javonte Williams. And if you're saying who's a guy that at the end of this year, he could be a top 5 option in startup drafts next year, I don't know that Kendre Miller could get there. He would have to just shock the world. But I think Javonte could get there. If he gets back and he gets healthy in the second half of the year, he looks great. And he's 24 years old and back and healthy. He could get there.
If you're a Javonte manager and you've had him this long, or you traded for him before last year, I'm assuming you're just holding because you're like, I want to see what I have here. I want to see what he can do. So Betz, anything on just the pup, because I think that shocked me as well. Any insight on that?
Yeah, I think the PUP list, obviously is very different in season than it is during training camp. In training camp, these guys can go on and off the list basically without any penalty. They can come on and off any time. But in season, if they start on the PUP list, they miss 6 weeks. And so I feel like that gets a lot of headlines early in training camp, but it doesn't necessarily mean a lot yet. Now, granted, it's certainly good news he's not on the PUP list relative to the alternative. If you remember, Chris Godwin avoided PUP last year, and we were all like, okay, that's great, but let's see what happens. And we saw him, 3 weeks in, start to actually look like Chris Godwin. Obviously, different injury, different position, not making any comparisons, but it is a good look for him. And you think about the trends over the last 2 months, I would say, they've been somewhat positive on a consistent basis. It's not like we had the rumblings of like, Dobbins is certainly not looking like himself. Like, let's see what's happening here. And so it's different. And I think that comparison made sense early on, but these guys are currently recovering at different rates. And he looks like he's on track to at least, I think, be active in week 1. But the data is pretty overwhelming that running backs don't do great off the ACL in year 1, let alone the, multi-ligament sort of injury that he had. So best case scenario for anyone that was able to get Javonte Williams in Dynasty this offseason was we had the worry, right, in March, April, etc. And now we're like, okay, here we go. And if he gets on the field, that's a win in this recovery. If he's back to himself by week 10, week 12, week 14, whatever, like, and you traded for him this past offseason, I think you can feel very confident rolling into next year. He's the dude, and he has the talent and the draft capital to support it. So I like this call. I think right now it's one of those bets you make for 2024 and beyond.
I'll throw in my running back here that I think he's just going to hold value more than people think. It's Naji Harris. Jason actually has him ranked inside the top 10. Our consensus, he's RB12. Jason has him at RB8. From week 10 on last year, he was the RB6. So I don't think anyone's arguing whether Naji Harris has a potential to finish the year, as a top 10 type back. Think about some context, though, for the Steelers. Not just with a rookie quarterback. They spent the fewest amount of U.S. dollars on offensive players in the entire NFL. They had the cheapest O-line in the entire NFL last year. And what they do, they spent the 14th overall pick on Broderick Jones. There's a lot of improvement that I just think this team was 28th in points per drive. They didn't have any big plays at all. And I think you're going to get more red zone opportunities for Naji. So for me, it's just saying he's only in year 3. He's totally fine. We don't have to worry. He's 25 years old. And I think this is a first round former player. So I think he's just going to hold value. It's not the sexiest of picks to say, like Naji Harris isn't going to be a top 5 dynasty running back next year, but holding somewhere between 7, 8, 9, I think is quite possible. And he would be somebody, if I'm in win now mode, I would love to acquire him. I'm not worried about the bottom falling out with Naji. And maybe I'm a little bit more bullish, but I think all 3 of us are very pro Steelers in almost every single format this year, which sounds scary with Kenny Pickett, but I think we all think they're going to do much better, right?
I would say I am definitely pro Steelers on beating what their current perceived value is. It's not necessarily pro Steelers like, oh, you want the Chargers? Dude, you should be in on the Steelers. I don't think they're going to be a superstar offense, but they just aren't being valued correctly right now. They're being valued like drudge, like a team that won't move the ball, won't score. You don't want any piece of it, like the team that it was last year. And I don't believe that. I think they're going to be a middle of the pack offense this season. And so, it's worth noting with Naji, he's, this season, 2023, he'll be in his third season. Then he's got the fourth because he's a first-round pick. They could pick up his fifth-year option, which for a running back, that seems like a somewhat realistic outcome, and then maybe franchise after that. So you've got, a lot of times people are afraid of Naji's age, because he came into the league a little older. He's 25 right now. We've been talking about, Javonte's 23. And so you think, oh, Javonte's got a lot more time left than Naji, but I'm not 100% sure how true that is. I feel like in today's NFL, it's really contract age. It's like, where are you at on your first contract? How many years can you get into contracts when that runs out, etc.? And I think Naji's set up pretty well, much better than his age would imply.
The efficiency numbers, like with Jaylen Warren, you can argue that all day, and I agree. Like, I think he's going to be involved in the offense. But this is just about pure opportunities for this offense, and there were very few, like, at all. There's a reason Kenny Pickett put the lowest touchdown rate ever for a rookie quarter. Like, it was bad. It was really bad. And so giving some more big opportunities down the field to open up red zone opportunities, I like Naji a lot, and he's somebody that I think I'd want to acquire right now. Let's take a quick break, and we'll come right back. I want us to play a little game here where we're a cartographer, which is, for those at home,
What's a cartographer?
It's a map. It's a map. Someone who makes
maps.
Yeah.
No, I knew that. I just
Obviously.
was like, yeah.
Yeah. I want us to map out.
Cartographer. Okay, I heard something different. Got it. Go on.
I want us to map out some running backs and kind of give people the journey of, if they have this person on their team, here's what you could expect for the next couple of years. And obviously in Dynasty, we're trying to project value beyond just 2023, which makes Dynasty a really hard format because a year from now, these things could change. So let's pick a veteran running back, and I kind of put the mark at 26 plus years old, and let's kind of map out where they could go, what you should expect, and maybe if there's a point where you would trade this player. So Betz, I'll let you start first on a player that I currently view as I would trade for this player if I'm a contender.
If you're a contender, this is one of the running backs I think you could actually go out and get. It's Joe Mixon. He's 27 years old. He is a guy that in the offseason we were very unsure about, right? Because there's the off-the-field legal issue that I think is still potentially in play. I think very, very, very unlikely for this year, but possible for next year. We could see a similar sort of like kick the can down the road sort of thing like we saw with Alvin Kamara. But, that plus the contract issue. He was due a ton of money. People thought maybe the Bengals somehow move on from him. They agree, or he agrees, I should say, to take a pay cut with the team this year and next year to stay on the team this year. But I just want to point out for everyone, I think we all saw that and we were like, oh, sweet. Joe Mixon on the Bengals for this year and next year guaranteed. It's only 2.75 dead money in next year, 2.75 million for them to move on from Joe Mixon. So essentially I'm treating it as a 1 year for sure thing with Joe Mixon. And the map that I kind of want to lay out here for Joe Mixon is I think there's a real possibility he's like, top 15 back this year, and then just all of a sudden, like, man, is this dude getting any work? Similar to a kind of, I see like a Leonard Fournette situation playing out with Joe Mixon next year. That's really how I feel when you look at how he performed on the field. His efficiency numbers have been falling off a cliff. Last year, 4.1 yards per carry was down to 3.9. Yards after contact per attempt down to 2.61. Missed tackle rate is down 4 percentage points from the year prior. And he played basically half the snaps, right? Losing work to Samaje Perine. And we like Samaje Perine for his pass catching ability, but like Joe Mixon should be out there. Like he's a talented guy, and the fact that he wasn't really does kind of have me wondering, like, how good is this dude really now at this point in his career? And if you remember last year, that 5 touchdown game, that was like more than a quarter of his fantasy points on the year. Was insane in that week. So truthfully, he kind of felt like a bit of a disappointment. And these guys that turn 27 next year, turning 28, really do have to kind of be worried. So I agree. I think he can be a value this year and can be out there getting a ton of pass catching work from Joe Burrow, which has been extremely valuable. But the writing is on the wall that the end is very near for Joe Mixon. I think not only in Dynasty, but truthfully maybe in the NFL as a consistent contributor. So if I am not a contender, I'm very worried about Joe Mixon.
But what you're saying is that he's a best ball league winner, right? That's what you're saying.
He was, Kyle. He was. But now that he's going maybe in the 4th round, by the time we get to camp, if there's no legal issues, he could be a 3rd round pick. I would say maybe at that point he's not. But when he was going in round 5, 6, I agree.
Yeah, it was when I sounded smart the one time this summer when I really liked Joe Mixon. But Jason, do you feel like beyond 1 year you could get more? Could you squeeze more life out of Joe Mixon than just this year?
Yeah, I think so. I believe he's a. I know you said you look at it as a 1-year contract. You laid that out, and that makes sense to me. I believe he will play 2 years. He took a pay cut this year. He took a pay cut next year, so he's already given some money back with their kind of. They need to pay Joe Burrow. They need to figure out T. Higgins. I think that they worked this contract in a way where they're saying, we want you to play 2 more years for us. Take a hit this year, take a hit next year. We'll pay you this year. We'll pay you next year. You'll be the dude. So I think you could get a 2-year window out of Joe Mixon. And if you get a 2-year window, I think Leonard Fournette's great comp because he wasn't that good. He wasn't very efficient. But he was just getting so much work that he was very valuable for fantasy football, and that's what Joe Mixon's going to be. I mean, you're talking about being the guy with an empty depth chart for Joe Burrow and the Bengals' high-flying offense. You're going to score a lot of fantasy points. Hopefully it just, it doesn't come all in one game, Joe.
I just love Joe Mixon from opportunity standpoint. I mean, he had the 2nd most carries inside the 10 last year and only 6 touchdowns. So it's like there's so much to like that even if he's not efficient and I bet he could fall in the end zone 10 times and you would be stoked to have him right now where you can get him as kind of like an RB2 type price. If you're winning right now, if you're contending bets, would you rather have Joe Mixon or a 2024 first?
I mean, if it was me, just no questions about it. I'm taking a 1st round pick for Joe Mixon, whose value will fall off a cliff after this season.
That's
agree. Just what happens with these running backs, right? So I'm cashing out if I can.
Jason, if you were in win now, would you make that trade?
If I'm in win now, I think I would make that trade. I would take the Joe Mixon side simply because when you're talking about I'm not playing in Superflex leagues, probably a little bit different in Superflex, just because the value of the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th pick tends to be much, much greater because you'll have a handful of quarterbacks that push it up. But generally speaking, if I think I'm a contender, if I'm going to be in that 10 through 12 pick, that's not a guarantee. Like you look at who you're drafting right now with the 11th pick and you go, okay, well, that player could be great. I mean, Quentin Johnston could be awesome. And you could say, oh, I'll trade, I would much rather have Quentin Johnston than Joe Mixon. If this was a startup draft, I would certainly draft Quentin Johnston ahead of Joe Mixon. So yes. However, we haven't seen him. There's no guarantee. We know that, the back of the 1st round, you're already getting to where you're at best like a 70% hit rate. So if that ends up flaming out and you get a guaranteed production for a guy in a championship window, people too often play for the future. You can't usually win championships playing too much for the future. And I think in the end, people forget what the goal is when you play. It's not to have a really good team. It's to win the championship.
Right. And a trade calculator every single time is going to say, oh, well, the 1st round pick's way more valuable than an aged Joe Mixon. But at the end of the day, like you said, trying to win.
Can I hop in just for 1 second? I think trade calculator is the dumbest thing I've ever seen.
Oh, that's worse.
We answered that. I forget which episode it was. Maybe it was a mailbag one, and Mike was on it. So maybe you didn't get to give your thoughts. But we basically, I think there's some value if you want a tiebreaker, you want to throw it out, and they're fun numbers. But dynasty valuations are so hard year to year. I mean, we brought it up on this podcast of just how much changes, and it's perceived value. This is what I think people will pay for this, not what they're actually worth. And so you can play around with those numbers forever.
Trade calculators are great for taking advantage of people if you want to be like, hey, look at what this trade calculator says. You're getting a great deal.
Right, because in a trade calculator, it's going to say you get a 2024 first. But like Jason pointed out, if that first ends up being, the 111 or the 112, it's a very different conversation than the 101. So, Jason, I'll let you go next with a player, Miles Adam Sanders. I just found out his middle name the other day.
Thank you. Yeah, so in today's NFL, almost no running backs get a second contract. That's just life, not at least a worthy one of becoming a starter for, a full second contract. But sometimes they do, and a few do, and this one already has. Miles Sanders just got a 4-year contract. Now, it is a guaranteed 2-year contract. He's not really eligible to be cut for any kind of sensible reason for the next 2 seasons. After that, he'll carry like an $8 million cap hit and could be cut for $2 million. So maybe they need to shave a little bit of money, but it's actually not that bad a contract at that point either. So he's under contract for 4 years. He looked great. He's 26 years old, and he's on an ascending offense. You know, obviously I'm not huge into rookie-led offenses. I think that the Carolina Panthers this year will be, below the midpoint as far as they'll be a bottom half offense. But we just talked about Naji last year. Naji still had value for a putrid offense, and I believe that Miles Sanders will be more of a bell cow type of usage. There's videos of GM, head coach, and Sanders all sitting together talking about his pass catching, literally saying they want him to catch 50 balls. This isn't like a beat reporter saying, I think Miles Sanders is going to catch 50 passes. This is the people who make it happen, saying they want him to be used in that way. They want him to get 50 like he had his rookie season. And so if you're telling me that Miles Sanders catches 50 passes, he's going to be good for fantasy. And then the following year, he is already under contract locked in as their starter, and they're going to be better. Bryce Young will take a step forward. Now you've got kind of a really nice window, I think, for 2 to 4 years with Sanders. So he's a guy that I believe he's a little undervalued right now. I don't think people are sure that he's going to be a workhorse, so you're not paying that kind of premium. When I look at his average draft price, his startup ADP, those type of things, I feel like I value him more than that. And the fact that running backs are always on a 2-year window. We always talk about, like, in Dynasty, you want a 3-year window. Well, yeah, of course you do. With running backs, you're just not going to get it. With running backs, you got to be realistic. You got to look at like a 2-year window. And Sanders is locked up for a 2-year window. He will be the dude this year. He will be the dude next year. Now, that might not be a top 6 fantasy running back either season, but it should be like a top 15 running back both seasons. So I'm in on Miles Sanders.
Yeah, his dead cap goes to 2.9 in 2025. So, yeah, I mean, it's a gift to be able to get a player that still only 26 years old and say, I get a 2-year window with this player. I feel like the ceiling obviously isn't, but maybe you can't always search for that with running backs. Like, we're all trying to acquire running backs in every single league. So, Betz, what do you think Miles Sanders' season, as Jason kind of laid out, kind of top 15, feels pretty safe to kind of look there, but what do you think his ceiling is over the next 2 years?
I mean, it's tough, right? Because we haven't seen that pass catching ability, and really what you need to be a top 10, top 5 fantasy back is pass catching, or you're Derrick Henry, right? Or Nick Chubb, where you're just like one of the best runners in the league on an offense that's going to score a ton of touchdowns. So I agree with Jason. I don't think the Panthers are going to be a top 15, top 10 offense as a whole this year, and so that might cap the ceiling from a touchdown outlook for Sanders. So yeah, right around 15 to 20 in running back finishes by the end of the year might be pretty reasonable. I mean, there's actually kind of a lot to like in Carolina's run game. Like, the offensive line was very good last year in run blocking. It's why D'Onta Foreman was very good at times. Chuba Hubbard even had success behind that line. And I think Frank Reich's a pretty smart coach who knows, like, hey, let's not put too much on Bryce Young's shoulders as, a rookie right away. And in his tenure with Indy, like, he's been pretty conservative from a play calling standpoint, except for when he had Andrew Luck. So I think we're going to see similar stuff this year. I think Miles Sanders is going to be the focal point of the offense. So I agree. I do think he's a guy that people are kind of just like, we've seen this story before. Like, we were into Miles Sanders a few years ago, and then he burned everyone, and everyone's like, okay, he kind of is what he is. And the market every year just like flip-flops, right? Like, last year, everyone was so out, and he was a great pick at his ADP. And this year, people are kind of like, okay, I see the path, but I'm not really in. I think he has a good chance to outperform ADP again this year, based off the workload, the passing game, and the fact that there's no one really there that scares you for touches.
I'm going to throw out one more running back. I'm going to map them out. And I figured if there's one spot in this podcast for me to bring up some reference of just a map in Georgia, it's here. It's Nick Chubb from Cedarton, Georgia, people. It's my Georgia reference. 27.6 years old. I think most people look at Nick Chubb this year for 2023 and say, this dude can be the RB1 this year. Like, the backfield's to himself. He's also one of the most fun players in the league just to watch. Like, okay, he can just pulverize people. The splits were drastic last year. Jacoby Brissett, Deshaun Watson. I feel like we've laid that out a ton. Their plays per game is what shocked me the most. Like, they were running the second most plays per game in the league with Brissett, and then that changed, and he had no rushing touchdowns with Deshaun Watson in those final ones. So that's gotta give. But I think what you're going to get is a monster season this year. He has the second highest running back cap hit in the league, and they have some really easy games. They have some games against the AFC South, so you get the Texans where you just get to run over them. Colts, some bad teams. They get some NFC West teams. Sorry, Jason, but he's going to destroy the Cardinals.
What?
And would that be fun for you, though, to watch Nick Chubb, who's, I know, one of your favorite players to watch, too, just destroy the Cardinals?
No.
I just want to see him
what a
annihilate
dumb question.
I want to see him annihilate them.
When you're rooting for a team, do you want to watch the other one just beat the tar out of you? No.
Well, you know what? It's going to happen.
I know it's going to happen.
Next year, Nick Chubb has the highest running back cap hit in the league at 16.2. So my question is, do they Derrick Henry this thing where they say, we're going to ride off into the sunset, we're going to restructure some stuff, push some money down the road, and just say we get 2 years with Nick Chubb? Or is it we get 1 year and then we don't know? What do you guys think?
I think you get 1 year. This is a team that is hurting for finances soon because of the worst deal ever given to any NFL player in Deshaun Watson. I don't know that they're going to have a lot of flexibility when he's got a $16 million dead cap and they could cut him, or only a $4 million dead cap, but a $16 million cap hit. I believe they're going to ride him into the ground this season, and they more than likely, like, I could see either. I don't think it's a guarantee. I'm not saying, they're definitely cutting him, but it's, my arrow is more on the cut side after this season than on the restructure and keep it going side.
So, like, let's say that Nick Chubb is awesome this year, like 1,500 rushing yards, 13 rushing touchdowns. They go to the playoffs. It would be very hard for me to see them just say we're outright cutting him, but
They would have to restructure at that point.
Right.
So I guess it is that's a solid mental exercise, because that is kind of the projection, right? I think we all project him to have a dominant season. So if he dominates, they're probably going to be forced to restructure because he is a more unique player. I think that there's a lot of running backs out there that are very, very good. Josh Jacobs, very, very good. But he's not unique. He's not something that can't really be replicated by other players, by even a committee of players. But when you're talking about a Derrick Henry or a Nick Chubb, there's a uniqueness to them that can wear a defense down that you can't just bring in a platoon or another, just a guy, and replace him with. And so, I changed my opinion. I think their hand will be forced to probably restructure based on how good he is, how unique he is, and the projection. Especially if you're out there and you think Deshaun Watson has a good year, and you think the Browns are going to do well. Like, I had the Browns in 4th place in this division. That's not my necessary outlook. But if you think the Browns are going to have a good season, then they will almost have their hands forced for sure.
The financials.
Just real quick, Kyle, before we move on for that, thinking next year, like this year they were so strapped for cash NFL draft picks that they couldn't really add much in the depth chart, and we're seeing that. I think next year they do have a second, they do have a 3rd round pick, so like you could see some competition for Nick Chubb next year. I don't think the situation is going to be, it could not be better right now for Nick Chubb when you look at who else is on the depth chart. Those guys have combined for 20-something total opportunities in their career, the guys that are behind him. So I think next year's situation, air quotes situation, just meaning running back competition, might be slightly worse, but if he has a good year and he's a key piece of the offense, I do agree there's a good chance he's still back and potentially on a restructure deal.
Yeah. So I think you acquiring him in a league, I traded for him in a league earlier this past summer. It's like, I get maybe a 2-year window, and that's pretty awesome for this elite level. And this is also why you can't just apply financials and just say, oh, well, here's his age, and, they'll definitely cut him. It's like, it's like they did it with Henry. They just said, let's just go for it. And they're kind of kicking it down the road, and they're going to pay for it, but hey, that's totally fine. Let's change gears and talk about a wild card running back. And with running backs, it's kind of hard because wide receivers, we think of them as super volatile. With running backs, we think, is this dude gone? Like, are they going to pull like a Carlos Hyde where it's like, oh, I remember when he was good. Oh, he's out of the league. Like, those are the kind of players you deal with in Dynasty all the time. So, Betz, I traded for this player earlier this summer in a main league, and it scares me. Jason, I traded for him in Dino Jr. I don't know if you knew that. Alexander Madison.
I did not know that. I missed that. You rapscallion.
I had to because I'm in the same boat as my team is aging, my window's closing, but I still have a shot. So, Betz, tell me about Alexander Madison and his range of outcomes and why he could be the RB1 overall.
Betz, real quick before you say that, I just need to correct one thing. Kyle said he still has a shot. He's thought that the last 3 years. And I've won the championship each one of those. Did you think I left the league? Did you think like I just
Kyle,
you must have thought
man. You set yourself up.
You
so
must
bad
have
for
thought
that.
I was that I left and like I'm just handing over Dino Jr. to the rest of the league and then you'd have a shot. You don't have a shot. Champ. Go on, Betz.
What is awesome about this trade as well is that Ketron, biggest loser, great friend of the show, asked me to come on in Dino Jr. as a co-manager. He's like, dude, I'm getting killed. I need some help. I'm like, okay. Well, you've got Russell Wilson, so that's your first problem. But I'm in the league, so I see the trade go through. Kyle sends it through. It's accepted, whatever. Not with us, with someone else. And then seconds later, Kyle texts me, hey, dude, which side would you take? Alexander Madison or first or whatever the trade was.
I had no
because
idea you were in the league.
I knew the situation, I said, oh, my gosh, I would take the other side in a heartbeat. And he's like, all right, man. Well, I traded for Madison, so we'll see how this goes. So I'm already trolling Kyle. But the reason I think he's a wild card is because I do see the upside case for Alexander Madison. The team made plans well ahead of June 1st to move on from Dalvin Cook. They re-signed Alexander Madison as if he was going to be the guy. So this was in their plans throughout the offseason. And whenever Dalvin Cook's been out, Alexander Madison has been awesome. When he's averaged 15 plus opportunities per game, he's almost at 17 fantasy points. If we knew we were getting that from Alexander Madison, he should be going in the top 2 rounds of fantasy drafts for redraft leagues. Clearly, it's a small sample size, so no one's projecting that. But we've seen this story before, haven't we? Where it's like, okay, this guy's really talented. He should be the guy. Let's get this RB1 out of there. Let's get this guy in as the starter. And we've seen Lamar Millers, Tevin Coleman's of the world just go to places where they are the guy and flame out. And I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but I think that is in the range of outcomes for Alexander Madison. We just haven't seen him hold up for an entire season. So I like the opportunity. We like the Vikings offense. I think the path for not only, the early down work, but also getting volume as a receiver is there. He's been a very reliable pass catcher with 83% catch rate. So I see the path where it goes very well, but we've seen the story before where it goes very, very poorly and that player's dynasty value falls off a cliff.
Just tell me it's going to be okay, Jason.
I don't know. I don't really want to make you happy. My assumption truly is that it will go okay this year for Alexander Madison. I think he'll be a solid running back 2 based on volume. I don't think he's good enough to be something special, but I do think that the Vikings' financial situation is in a place where he could end up with another 2-year window. So if it doesn't cost you much, Alexander Madison, I mean, he is a wild card. He's got a very large range of outcomes, and most likely his range of outcomes will outproduce what his cost is right now, depending on, obviously, you got Alexander Madison truthers out there. Like, if Mike had Alexander Madison in a league, then the cost is exorbitant because you'll never get him. So if you're in just an average league or a startup draft, I think Alexander Madison's value is probably a little lower than what it should be in a startup draft because we talk about these two-year windows mattering, and I think he does have a 2-year window.
Betz, so you mentioned Joe Mixon earlier, potentially with two-year window. Would you rather have on a win-now team Joe Mixon or Alexander Madison?
Great question.
Oh, that's so close. I think I would take Joe Mixon because I know Joe Burrow is checking the ball down to him consistently. I think it's going to happen with Alexander Madison, but I'm not entirely sure. So I think I lean with the better offense and better quarterback and go Joe Mixon.
He answered correctly.
Ooh.
Okay, apparently I did.
Kyle, who would you take?
I would totally take Alexander Madison. He's listening, so I got to back him up and make sure my trade was worthwhile. Oh, man. Jason, Who's your guy? Who's your wild card?
My wild card is J.K. Dobbins. J.K. Dobbins his range of outcomes to me is incredible. He tried to get a deal. He wants to extend because he's a running back and he's coming up to the end of his contract and he's afraid. And I don't blame him for wanting it. It's not going to happen. So he's playing right now for a contract. He's been so good. Like, when he's on the field, he's been great for fantasy, great for the Ravens, just an absolutely exceptional player. He is now 2 years removed from the catastrophic knee injury that hampered him so much last year. If he comes out this season, and I know ironically he's on the PUP for, I believe, a minor hamstring issue right now. That is so early and so minor for this time of year's PUP. But if he plays healthy this year and dominates, he is so young that I could see him get another contract. You look at what Miles Sanders did this last year. Miles Sanders was really, really good. The league went out and said, yeah, this is a good player. He hasn't been taken advantage of enough. I'm going to take him and make him the guy. I can see that as J.K. Dobbins' future. There's also the world where this dude's been injured. He's had leg injuries. He's currently on the PUP. He struggles this year. I mean, there's a reason the Ravens just brought in Melvin Gordon, and now it's a three-way rotation, and Melvin Gordon makes the roster, and the Gus Bus, and Dobbins just, he's one of many. And if that's the case, if he's just kind of part of a committee on a decent offense, then his career, sadly, is like probably near the end. Even though he's only 24 years old, you're talking about, I mean, he'll be on the free agent market, and he'll be signed, and he'll probably be signed to another committee or signed as a backup and be pretty irrelevant for fantasy at that point. Like, he has to go out and dominate this year, and I believe I think he can do that. If he does, he could have a great future. But yeah, it's not a guarantee by any stretch.
Yeah, that sentence that you just said of like he could be irrelevant like next year made me kind of like stop for a second. I was like, is that actually possible? And I was like, yeah, it really is. Like, if he disappoints this year, the market for him next year for a free agent running back is going to be almost nothing. And so that is terrifying to think about. But yeah, to speak to the Melvin Gordon thing, it is not only J.K. Dobbins on PUP. Gus Edwards apparently missed almost all the offseason program, doing some rehab work on the side. I couldn't figure out what that specifically was, but remember, he had the ACL issue last year too. So we'll see if Melvin Gordon even makes the team. But yeah, it's massive, right? Because like, I love this Ravens offense. I think we all want to buy into it. And if J.K. Dobbins was the dude, he could crush this year. J.K., please get on the field. Please stay healthy. Please don't hold out for the contract situation, because I think he could be awesome this year if he is the guy and he's healthy.
Yeah, I look at his age and I look at our rankings, and when I'm sorting by age, and I'm like, he's still in that window where this guy can be awesome. And like Jason mentioned, like, who knows, a year or two from now, you'd be like, I remember when I was holding on to JK thinking that he would be awesome, and I just held on too long. And then I just had to let him go, just at the bottom of the ocean, Jack and Rose style. Okay, I've got a wild card for us, and this was actually brought up in the Discord as well. It's Tank Bigsby, almost 22 years old. And this question from Discord was, does Tank Bigsby overtake ETN as the primary running back in Jacksonville over the next year? And I think that's probably too far to jump. But the question I have is, how much work does he get in year one? And then how much can he get moving forward? I know you liked him in the pre-draft process, Jason, a lot. And he's got the body for the NFL. We had his running back coach get to talk him up a little bit, and ETN come out with that silly quote Mike brought up last week about him being spooked. So, Jason, how do you see the workload this year for Bigsby?
I think it will be more than ETN truthers want to believe. I think Bigsby is a very talented player, and he can catch passes as well. He fits the system pretty good, so this is a coaching staff. And they've come out and said this. They came out and said they don't want to give ETN the type of work that he was receiving at parts last year, where it was, 17, 18, 19 carries a game. That's just, he's not built for that. Even though it says that he weighs 215, and like a 215-pound back can be built for a workload like that, ETN, I don't know where that weight is, man. He gets knocked around out there, flies back when he's hit. They don't want to give him abuse. They want to let him be an efficient, big play machine. And ETN will be the primary back. He'll be the number one. But I do think Tank Bigsby could end up being the goal line back, and he could end up eating into pass catching work. So those are the two most valuable things for fantasy football for the running back. So it scares me a little bit with ETN and excites me a little bit for Tank Bigsby. My guess is that going forward, it's a committee that has ETN in the lead and the most fantasy relevant, and just basically a backup insurance option for Tank Bigsby, who makes you so angry that they're not just giving Travis Etienne everything.
Right. The between the 20s work, that was what I used to always call Devin Singletary, is like he'd look great between the 20s. They'd use him in the pass catching. And then when you get near the goal line, it was somebody else. It was Josh Allen. That's what I'm so worried about with ETN, is that you do have a quarterback that Trevor Lawrence could easily run for 4 or 5 touchdowns. You get Bigsby another, 5 or 6, and you look up and you go, ETN, he's not getting the passing work. We talked about that last week. And so you're kind of left wanting. So I like Bigsby as somebody right now that could move up a year or two from now in the rankings. Jason has him at RB 31, which I think is much more bullish than Andy and Mike are. So I'm a fan. I'm a fan of Takes Bigsby. I love him in Dynasty because I can wait. He's probably going to be more annoying to ETN managers than anything else this first year. But remember, ETN was not drafted by this regime. Okay, so they don't have the same ties that we think of. ETN does have kind of a extra year where he lost it, and so the wear and tear might be different. But I don't know, like I love the early breakout age for Bigsby in the SEC, and we've heard so much. Like I get the pup pieces, but I feel like he's one of the most consistent players that I've heard this offseason of. They love this guy and he's showing out. Have you guys been hearing that?
Yeah. I mean, I haven't necessarily been hearing that specifically, Kyle. But I mean, you kind of are hearing or seeing a trend of like, okay, last year, if you just go back to week 1, right, James Robinson was on this team, which is crazy to even remember. But I don't think giving Travis Etienne 80% of the running back carries was the plan. They had James Robinson, and he clearly just kind of flamed out. And so they were like, well, here we go. This is what we're doing. And immediately after the season, there was talk of maybe he got too much work, or maybe he kind of fell off at the end because of that. And that was somewhat consistent leading up to the NFL draft. Then they backed it up by actually taking a running back on day 2 and Tank Bigsby. So I've been following that trend all the way back to last year. And then the fact that he's been pretty, I think, consistently hyped up or involved throughout the offseason for Tank Bigsby when he's been on the field with the Jaguars. So I do see it, and I do think that trend is, I think, somewhat telling.
Yeah, it'll be interesting during the season. I feel like he's going to be one of those running backs that, where you talk about in waivers for redraft, like pick up this guy, he's getting some more workload, but week 1 usage will be the interesting thing. They play the Colts in week 1. Let's get to one last segment.
Take it or leave it.
We're going to give a parting thought here, and this question, just kind of the end of the bench. This is somebody past RB 50 in our rankings, just kind of way past there. Who is your favorite kind of late round, deep dynasty, nasty boy? So Jason, if you want to hit that nasty drop, you just nasty all day long. And yeah, that's what I liked. So who's somebody just deep in the dynasty rankings that you just want to mention at the very end? Jason, I'll let you start.
Oh, mine's great. Mine is great. Here's why. We're talking about nasty boys. We're talking about guys that aren't in the top 50, not overall, at the running back position. So they're irrelevant. If they're not in the top 50, they're dead. There's nothing. There's no jewel to be found after 50. Can I interest you in a pass-catching first-round NFL draft pick who's 24 years old? He's 24 years old.
I'm fully in.
You're talking to the wrong guy, Jason.
He's 24 years old. He's a first-round pick. He's got hype.
He has so much in best ball.
He's had production. It's Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I mean, this guy is getting in fantasy football circles, and I think exclusively in fantasy football circles. He is so crapped on and so left for dead and so hated, and he is just a worthless bum. But I think that is only in fantasy football circles. I think it's because he was drafted ahead of Jonathan Taylor, average draft position, because he went in the first round. It's because he's a disappointment for fantasy players for, what was drafted. I don't think the Chiefs hate Clyde Edwards-Helaire. They gave him plenty of work last year. He was a big part of the team. Then he got injured. And I mean, to me, it's just so overblown that Clyde is worthless. He's not going to do anything again. You telling me that Clyde Edwards-Helaire, with his skill set at 24 years old, his draft pedigree in the past, his connection and association with Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs' offense and his Super Bowl rings, you're telling me that he's not going to get another contract? Like the rest of the NFL's not going to think, that guy can help my football team. He's obviously not going to be a workhorse back. He's not going to be a top 12 fantasy option, but he's not dead. He's going to be on NFL fields, I believe, for many years, catching passes and doing things that make a dent in fantasy. So for talking about nasty boys outside the top 50, that's not where he belongs.
Jason, you're the smartest person I've ever talked to.
That's
true. I love you. And yeah, he's my highest exposure running back in best ball this year.
He's got to be close for me. And you know what's funny about this is last year, my highest exposure player by 10 miles, because I could get him in the very last round all offseason, was Jerick McKinnon. It was like, why are people not paying attention to this guy who is a part of the rotation for Patrick Mahomes' backfield, who was used in the playoffs a year prior, and now it's completely flipped. It's like, are you guys not paying attention? Like, he was injured. Like, you can get him in the last round of best ball or near there. I think he's creeped up a little bit, but early in the offseason I was getting him in the last round, and he's in the rotation for Patrick Mahomes. Touchdowns be coming.
I mean, people come for the dynasty takes, but they stay here for the best ball stuff. Yeah. I mean, I love it.
Obviously.
Betz, go for it.
The best part about CH, by the way, too, is like you go to a dynasty deal and you negotiate a player, you're close on someone else, and you're like, I'm right there. Why don't you just throw in CH and let's get this done? Sure, fine. That's the way you attack it. Do not go to someone and be like, hey, I'll give you a third for CH. They'll be like, what do you know that I don't know? So you got to throw him in as the side piece. The name I want to bring to the table as a potential candidate to be, I think, sneakily a decent contributor to your roster if you're a contender right now that will cost you virtually nothing, is D'Onta Foreman, who is 27.3 years old. Currently, we have him as RB 54 in our running back rankings. He's in Chicago on a one-year deal, and really what this comes down to is whether or not Roschon Johnson carves out a role and whether or not Khalil Herbert is the guy. If those guys are not, the only option is D'Onta Foreman, who was quietly very good last year with Carolina. And the situation is a little bit different as far as the rushing quarterback. There's not going to be any receiving volume for Foreman, so he's kind of a two-down grinder. But if the running game can get off the ground and if the running game can be productive behind, I think, an improved offensive line in Chicago, and D'Onta Foreman gets the opportunity. Last year, he was awesome, 8th in rushing yards over expected, average more than 17 carries per game from week 7 on when he was the guy in Carolina last year. So I think he is quietly like a solid throw a third-round pick at someone and see if you can get him. And if he is the guy, he could be a massive win. But if he doesn't work out, it's such a small loss, it's no big deal. And
when he plays the Falcons, you can just put him down for 150.
202, guaranteed.
Yep. Week 17, they play. I'm going to throw out one more dude into your bench. He's probably sitting potentially on your waiver wire in your dynasty leagues. On Sleeper, he's only rostered in 62% of leagues. It's Chris Rodriguez Jr., He was a 6th-round pick for the Washington, whatever they're going to be called. And Chris Rodriguez, the depth chart there is not intimidating. With Gibson, who knows beyond this year, Brian Robinson is just a plotter. And he was PFF's highest-graded runner last year in the SEC. And this dude can break tackles. He's a Ron Rivera type of guy. And I feel like I'm given a pretty good narrative of what Ron Rivera wants in a running back. So into your bench, throw him there. Since 2014, here are the top total missed tackles forced per game in the NCAA. Bijan was 1 and 2, and then the third best season was Chris Rodriguez Jr., who was with Bananarama. He was with Will Levis at Kentucky, so way better than Will Levis. So just throw him on the end of your bench, see what happens. And a year from now, he could carve out a role. He also is a 6th-round pick, so it probably doesn't even matter. But you guys like any Chris Rodriguez, or am I just on an island?
I don't know if Betz is on that island with you, but I'm on a boat. I'm on a boat and I'm sailing away. No, thank you.
I don't know, man. Anytime a team tells you they have a 3rd-round grade on a player and they choose to wait until round 6 to take him, I say I don't believe you, and let's listen to the draft capital. So, yeah, fine, throw him on your bench, see what happens, but I'm not expecting anything.
The reality is that this team will have a different regime, a different coaching staff next year, and
different name.
Different name. It'll be a completely different franchise next year, and the 6th-round running back is probably going to be irrelevant.
But what if?
I mean, it is important in Dynasty to have certain names you pay attention to. You know, James Robinson was an undrafted free agent, and you know, you wrote an article, Kyle, I believe, where you mentioned James Robinson as someone to watch for in those undrafted free agents. It's not saying Chris Rodriguez Jr. is going to be something special, and you weren't sitting there saying James Robinson is going to be something special. But then when something happens and the opportunity happens, or you know, the buzz is happening and things are growing, and you see a performance, now you go, okay, I know this guy can handle it. I was prepared for this moment. So it is important for dynasty managers to know some of these names for when the unlikely hits, that they don't wait. Because when it came to James Robinson, there were people that were in right off the bat, and then they got like a great year and a half of value off of waivers in Dynasty, or there were people that were like, I want to see a little bit more. I'm not sure that this is real. They were unprepared, and they didn't get him.
Right. You just need to be proactive. I mean, even this point, I feel like we've hit a dead spot, but now we're getting to the point where you're going to see players play, people get hurt, just so many different changes with depth charts. So make sure you are always turning over the end of your bench and looking at stuff. But that's going to do it for this episode, Fantasy Footballers Dynasty Podcast. You get all of our rankings in the Ultimate Draft Kit Plus. Have a good week.
Thanks for listening to the Fantasy Footballers Dynasty Podcast. If you want to take your dynasty skills to the next level, check out thefantasyfootballers.com.